When Elvis Presley brought his 5-year-old daughter on stage in 1973, the crowd expected a show fit for a king. But halfway through Love Me Tender, little Lisa Marie did the unthinkable. She burst into laughter. The orchestra froze. The king hesitated. And what happened next melted millions of hearts for generations to come. Las Vegas Hilton, April 4, 1973. Golden lights poured over the stage like honey. The air was thick with heat, perfume, and electricity. More than 2,000 people packed the showroom, holding their breath as the king stepped into view. The orchestra hit its cue. The drums thudded. The guitars shimmered. And when Elvis Presley raised his hand, the roar of the crowd was so loud it drowned out the opening note. But behind the red curtain, a small figure stood frozen. 5-year-old Lisa Marie. She clutched a tiny teddy bear in her arms, the same one her father had given her that morning. The bear's fur was worn thin. Elvis glanced toward the wings and smiled. Then, with a small nod, he beckoned her forward. The spotlight shifted. A child stepped out into the sea of light. The audience gasped. A few people in the front rows reached for their cameras. One whispered, "That's his little girl." Lisa blinked in the brightness, her tiny blue dress catching the light like silk. The crowd melted into applause, softer now, almost protective. Elvis knelt beside her, whispering something no microphone could catch. She nodded, still holding her teddy. The orchestra began again. The familiar tune of Love Me Tender floated through the air. Elvis's voice was low, tender, wrapped in velvet. He sang not to the audience, but to her. You could feel it, a father singing to his child, not a performer entertaining fans. The crowd swayed in silence. Somewhere in the back row, a woman dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Elvis reached for Lisa's hand. She looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, unsure if she should sing too. He laughed softly. A sound picked up faintly on one of the bootleg tapes later discovered by fans. Every word felt alive. Every note felt like a heartbeat. And yet, in the middle of that perfect moment, something unexpected began to stir. Lisa's tiny lips trembled. Not from nerves, but from something bubbling inside her. A giggle, quiet at first, then another, louder this time. She was laughing. The orchestra faltered for half a second. A violinist lost his cue. The conductor froze. Elvis turned, still mid-verse, confusion flashing across his face. The audience watched, silent, unsure what was happening. Lisa pressed both hands over her mouth. But the laughter wouldn't stop. It spilled out of her, bright and contagious, filling the entire Hilton showroom. For a moment, even Elvis couldn't move. He stared at her, lips parted, mic hanging loose in his hand. The king of rock and roll silent on his own stage. What happens when the world's most famous man suddenly looks like every other dad? Seconds stretched like minutes. The lights seemed to hum louder. The band waited for his signal. Elvis blinked once, then twice. And then, he smiled. He started laughing too. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't planned. But in that instant, every fan saw something they'd never seen before. Elvis Presley, not the superstar, but the father. The crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, clapping. A wave of warmth that filled the room. Elvis kneeled down beside Lisa, holding the microphone out between them. "Guess she's got her daddy's laugh," he said, his voice cracking with amusement. The audience exploded in laughter and applause. The tension broke, replaced by something simple and human. That sound, father and daughter laughing together, became the highlight of the night. A man named James Burton, his longtime guitarist, would later recall it in an interview. "You could hear every grown man in that room exhale," he said. "It was like watching the legend take off his crown for a minute." Even years later, fans would talk about the laughter. It echoed on bootleg recordings, a faint giggle behind the music. Some said that moment changed how they saw him forever. And maybe it did, because for once the king wasn't perfect. He was just real. The show went on, but the room felt different now. Softer, lighter. It was as if, in one laugh, Elvis Presley reminded the world that joy was stronger than perfection. Still, no one in that audience could have guessed what that small, innocent interruption would become. A piece of history whispered through the years, replayed, retold, and remembered. A single laugh that would outlive the song itself. What would you have done if your child broke the silence of 2,000 fans? Laugh with her, or hush her? Elvis made his choice, and the world never forgot it. For a few seconds, the room was still trembling from laughter. The band tried to regroup, the brass section exchanging glances as if waiting for a cue that never came. Elvis leaned his elbow on the mic stand, still chuckling under his breath. All right, he muttered, the grin still tugging at his mouth. But Lisa wasn't finished. She had found it, that contagious rhythm children have when joy becomes unstoppable. Her shoulders shook. Her tiny voice bubbled into another fit of laughter. The crowd melted again. Cameras flashed. Fans in sequin dresses leaned forward, smiling through tears. Even the stagehands, half hidden in the shadows, were grinning. The orchestra paused mid-bar. The conductor looked up, waiting for Elvis's hand. But the king didn't lift it. He was too busy watching his daughter. The world had seen Elvis Presley in every way imaginable, on magazine covers, in gold lame suits, bathed in sweat and light. But never like this. Here, under the hot Hilton lights, he wasn't the legend who ruled Las Vegas. He was just a dad trying not to laugh too hard. Lisa looked up at him, her cheeks pink, her eyes wide. "Daddy," she whispered into the mic by accident, her voice echoing through the speakers. The audience gasped, then laughed with her. The mic hissed. Elvis raised his brows, surprised, then smiled wider. He bent down and whispered something into her ear. No one ever heard what he said, but her laughter softened. She nodded, taking a deep breath, trying to hold it in. Then, out of nowhere, the band began again. The opening chords of Love Me Tender returned, gentle, steady, as if nothing had happened. Elvis cleared his throat, still smiling, and sang the next line. "Love me tender, love me sweet." Lisa bit her lip, trying to behave. For a moment she managed. Then he winked at her. She burst again. The audience screamed with laughter. The song broke apart completely now. A mix of applause, giggles, and joyful chaos. Elvis threw his head back and laughed like he hadn't in years. It was pure, unguarded, human. What's stronger than the sound of laughter that's real? A man in the front row, an off-duty reporter from the Las Vegas Sun, scribbled notes. His article the next morning would read, "The king was dethroned by a 5-year-old princess." Backstage, one of the sound techs hit record on a reel-to-reel tape just to capture it. That same tape would later surface in fan clubs as the Hilton Laugh Session. You can hear it still. The soft crackle of the mic, Elvis's deep chuckle, Lisa's high giggle weaving through the sound like music itself. No one knew it then, but that moment would become a treasure. A recording traded among fans for decades. Proof that even the biggest star on earth could be disarmed by love. As the song stumbled to a messy but beautiful end, Elvis lifted Lisa into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder, embarrassed and happy all at once. The crowd stood to their feet. Not because of the music, but because of the moment. Every person there had seen something they didn't expect. That behind the legend, there was still a man who remembered what mattered. The applause lasted nearly 2 minutes. Elvis didn't bow. He just smiled, mouthed a quiet thank you, and carried Lisa off stage. The lights dimmed. The crowd didn't move. It was as if no one wanted the spell to break. In the hallway behind the curtain, James Burton would later recall, Elvis turned to his band and said softly, "Don't cut that from the recording. That's the best part of the night." His voice cracked when he said it, and from that day forward it became part of the legend. Not the polished image of the king, but the story of the father who laughed with his daughter in front of thousands. Sometimes it's the unplanned moments that make us feel closest to the truth, because perfection fades. But laughter stays. Would you have stopped the show, or let the world see your joy? Elvis let them see it all, and the world never looked at him the same way again. The applause finally faded, but the echo of laughter still hung in the air like perfume. The room erupted in cheers once more. But this time, the energy was different, softer, warmer, like the crowd suddenly understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't about a perfect performance anymore. It was about a father choosing kindness over control. The orchestra picked up Can't Help Falling in Love, quietly at first, almost reverent. Elvis nodded to the conductor, signaling them to continue. He held Lisa on his hip and began to sing softly, as if it were a lullaby meant for her alone. The spotlight followed him, painting a halo on the floor beneath his feet. Every eye in that showroom stayed fixed on them, not blinking, afraid to miss a second. And then something beautiful happened. The crowd, one by one, began to hum along. Low, gentle voices joined in from the dark corners of the room. A few women closed their eyes, swaying. A man near the front bowed his head, whispering the words under his breath. It wasn't a concert anymore. It was communion. Imagine that, 2,000 strangers singing softly to a father and his little girl. For a moment, the Hilton showroom felt smaller, quieter. Elvis sang the final line. For I can't help falling in love with you. Silence followed. Then a single clap. Then a second. Then thunder. The ovation hit like a wave, shaking the walls. Lisa covered her ears, laughing again, overwhelmed. Elvis laughed too. But this time it was calm, grounded, real. He kissed her forehead before handing her to a stagehand waiting by the curtain. As she disappeared behind the velvet drape, Elvis turned back to the audience, eyes glistening. You never know what'll happen when family shows up, he said softly. The crowd roared again. But if you listened closely, beneath the noise you could hear something else, his sigh. A small, quiet exhale, almost like relief. Maybe he'd realized something right there on that stage. That for all the lights and cheers, this laughter, imperfection, love, was the real show. What's the point of applause if you can't share it with the ones you love most? That night, thousands saw the king take off his crown, and no one wanted him to put it back on. And while the rest of the concert went on as planned, nothing that followed would ever top that moment. Because sometimes, when a legend lets go of control, the crowd falls silent. Not from awe, but from understanding. They weren't just watching a performance anymore. They were watching a father rediscover himself. Backstage, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and laughter that hadn't quite died down. Elvis set his mic on the dressing table and exhaled, that long, tired sigh of a man coming down from the lights. Lisa sat on the couch beside his sequin jacket, still kicking her legs, her laughter echoing faintly in the narrow hallway. James Burton, the band's quiet lead guitarist, walked in holding a towel and said, "You all right, boss?" Elvis smiled, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, man. Just didn't see that coming." James chuckled. "Neither did we." For a moment, the two men sat in silence, the only sound the low hum of the amp still buzzing on standby. Elvis leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The rhinestones, the sideburns, the weight of expectation. He whispered half to himself, "That laugh. That's the real show, man. Not the lights." James nodded slowly. "Crowd loved it. You should have seen their faces." Elvis didn't answer. He was still staring at the mirror, at the man behind the legend. Because deep down, he knew what everyone else forgot, that fame could make you untouchable, but fatherhood kept you human. He turned toward Lisa, who was now fast asleep against the armrest. The teddy bear from earlier still clutched to her chest. The sight softened him. He reached out, brushing her hair back gently. "You done good, baby girl," he whispered. A camera flash blinked from the hallway, a stagehand trying to sneak a picture. Elvis waved him off with a grin. "Go on, son. Don't make her a headline tonight." The man smiled awkwardly and left. For a few quiet minutes, it was just Elvis, Lisa, and the distant murmur of the fans still lingering outside the showroom. He poured a glass of water, hands trembling slightly. Decades of fame had given him everything. Yet in that small, unscripted laugh, he'd felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He looked around the room. Posters of him hung on the walls. Gold records. Flowers from fans. But none of it compared to the little girl asleep beside him. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Encore in 5, Mr. Presley." Elvis hesitated. For the first time in his career, he didn't want to go back out. He glanced at Lisa again. "She's my encore," he muttered. Still, duty called. He stood, adjusted his collar, took one last look in the mirror. Not as the king, but as a dad who'd just been reminded what really mattered. And when he stepped back onto the stage, something in him had changed. He sang the next set softer, slower, almost as if he didn't want to break the spell that laugh had cast. The crowd noticed. The whole energy of the room shifted. There was no flash, no showmanship, just sincerity. Every note felt personal, every lyric honest. When he reached the final song of the night, "If I Can Dream," his voice cracked on the last line. Not from fatigue, from emotion. People who were there still talk about it. A woman named Clara Jennings, a lifelong fan who sat in the third row that night, later wrote in her diary, "I think we all saw the real Elvis for the first time. That diary page still exists, framed in a private fan collection in Memphis. It reads like a confession. He looked like a man who remembered who he was, because that night, the crown slipped, and what shone through was a father's heart. Maybe that's why people never forgot it. What do you hold on to when the spotlight fades, the fame, or the faces that wait in the wings?" For Elvis, the answer came in a 5-year-old's laugh. And that sound, that joy, would haunt him in the sweetest way for the rest of his life. Years later, long after the Hilton lights dimmed for good, that night lived on, in whispers, bootlegs, and memories. By 1977, fans traded cassette tapes labeled in shaky handwriting, "Hilton 73, The Laugh." You could barely hear it over the music. The faint sound of a child's giggle, followed by Elvis's soft chuckle echoing across the hall. It wasn't a hit single. It wasn't on any album. But to the fans, it meant more than all the gold records combined. Because it was proof. Proof that the king of rock and roll could still be human. In fan clubs from Nashville to Tokyo, people shared stories about that night. Some claimed they'd been there. Others said they'd only heard about it. But all agreed it was one of the most genuine moments Elvis ever gave his audience. One fan named Maria Lawson, who'd been 19 at the time, wrote a letter to Elvis Monthly magazine in 1978. Her words read, "When Lisa laughed, I saw my own little sister in her. And when Elvis laughed too, I saw every father who ever loved his child more than his fame." That letter spread through fan newsletters across the world, reprinted again and again. By the early 1980s, a small group of collectors in Memphis claimed to have found the original reel-to-reel tape, stored in a staff member's box of show archives. They restored it, pressed a few bootleg vinyls, and passed them around quietly. The sound quality was rough. Static, hiss, a crowd fading in and out. But when Lisa's laughter hit, even the noise seemed to brighten. You can still hear Elvis's voice, gentle and proud. "Guess she got her daddy's laugh." Those 7 words became almost sacred among Presley fans. They started printing them on pins, shirts, even posters hung in Graceland tribute halls. Decades later, Lisa Marie herself spoke about it in an interview. Her voice had that same warmth her father once carried. "I barely remember that night," she said, "but I've heard it. I've seen the tapes. People tell me how much it meant to them, how it showed him as a dad. And that's what he really was before anything else." Her words played over archival footage. Elvis on stage, holding her hand, eyes glowing with pride. What do we remember more, the perfection of the performance, or the imperfection that made it real? In 1998, on the 25th anniversary of that concert, fans gathered at the old Hilton site. They brought teddy bears, photos, even handwritten letters. Someone left a plaque on the wall outside the ballroom. It read, "April 4th, 1973, the night the king laughed." A local Vegas paper covered it with a short piece titled, "The Tender Side of Elvis." The reporter described fans crying softly as the old tape played over a speaker, that small laugh echoing across an empty hall. Even now, among Presley historians, They say it was the moment the myth cracked, and the man shone through. It was a laugh. A single, human sound that cracked open the myth of a man the world thought they already knew. Decades later, that laugh still plays through old speakers and YouTube clips restored from worn VHS tapes. The audio wobbles, the crowd noise fades in and out, but when it reaches that moment, the laughter, time seems to stop again. You can hear the difference. You can feel it. There's no superstar in that sound. No ego. Just a father who forgot the cameras for a few precious seconds. When fans talk about it today, they don't remember what song he sang before or after. They remember that he laughed with his little girl. They remember that he let go. And maybe that's why people still call that night the warmest show Elvis ever gave. Because perfection entertains us, but imperfection moves us. A few years ago, a bronze plaque was placed near the old Hilton Ballroom, right beside a display case of ticket stubs and vintage posters. It reads, "In laughter, he found his truest voice." Tourists stop there now, couples, fathers with daughters, even teenagers who weren't born when Elvis was alive. They listen to that old recording through a headset, hearing the giggle that once stopped the show. And every time it plays, someone smiles. One man was overheard saying, "That's when he became real to me." It's strange, isn't it? How the smallest moments, the ones nobody plans, become the ones that last forever. Elvis had sung to millions. He had broken records, changed music, redefined fame. Yet the story that still melts hearts came not from a song, but from a moment of laughter. It's as if the universe pressed pause on the spectacle and whispered, "Here, this is who he really is." The king didn't need to prove anything that night. He just needed to be a dad. And in doing so, he showed the world something far greater than fame. He showed them humanity. That's the part of his legacy you can't put in a museum or measure with chart numbers. It lives in the way people tell the story, in how they remember it. Maybe that's why every parent who watches that old clip smiles a little wider. Because deep down, they see themselves trying to balance life, love, and laughter in front of an audience that never stops watching. So if you ever chase perfection, remember this: the most unforgettable moments are often the ones that go wrong in the most beautiful way. A little girl's laugh, a father's choice to laugh back, and a legend who, for once, let the world see his heart instead of his crown. April 4th, 1973.
Las Vegas Hilton.
A night when music paused, laughter took the spotlight, and the king of rock and roll became something even greater: human. If the story touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that imperfection is what makes us unforgettable. Were you or someone you know at that 1973 Hilton show? Tell your story in the comments, and if you'd like more untold moments like this, watch the next legend story here.